I am Carrie Felton. I'm the Director of Worker Success at the National Fund.
And I am Tom Strong, the Director of Employer Activation at the National Fund.
So Tom and I spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about with each other industry partnerships. So it's a very exciting topic. Let's hear it for industry partnerships. So we want to open that conversation up to all of you today, right now. And just in case the topic of industry partnerships does not have you on the edge of your seat, we also embedded a few things in our presentation that we just want to notice if you're paying attention to throughout our presentation. So we're going to talk about things like
time travel,
Oprah GIFs, or GIFs, however you want to pronounce it.
gardening tips,
And we are going to make at least one reference to the Super Mario Brothers. So if you're having trouble paying attention or getting a little bored with our engaging conversation, you can just look right down on your list and just be looking for these Easter eggs.
So the first Easter egg is a gimme. We're going to take you back 15 years in time to the year 2009. Anyone remember that year well, maybe in the workforce field? Yeah, it kind of lingers in the memory, right? 2009, of course, was the year after the Great Recession started. And that was a big deal if you were in the workforce at that time. It's been crowded out a little bit by more recent events, but it was a hard time for many people. Unemployment was 10%. Wages stagnated badly, and of course the outcomes were felt most hard by people who struggled the most to get by before that. But the Great Recession was an interesting time too if you were in the workforce field. It was important and different because it was a time of big ideas. Workforce changed in 2009 because this was a time when we realized that what we were doing to that point was not going to work in the same way anymore. And so today we want to talk about three big ideas that emerged in that time that continue to shape the workforce field today. The first of those is the skills gap. The second one are talent pipelines. And third are industry partnerships, the main theme of our talk today. But let's start first with the skills gap. The skills gap is in a lot of ways the biggest idea, the most prominent one to come out of the crisis. And when you think about the skills gap, what you're really thinking about is a case about why we have bad things happen in the workforce, such as high unemployment, inequitable workforce outcomes, and wage stagnation. What the skills gap says is that these things happen because society changes fast, technology changes faster, and business has to keep up with all of that. So as a result, there are times when workers just don't have the right skills to compete. What the skills gap calls for is a really dramatic change to the way we organize our educational system and our vocational training systems in order to transform the economy itself, really.
And what's interesting about the skills gap explanation is that it's putting the responsibility of fixing this problem, yes, on training providers, but also on workers themselves to figure out how to get the right skills.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and important aspect of the skills gap that we're going to come back to. And it needs to be said that this was a really prominent idea when it comes to workforce development. There were people in major newspapers arguing every day about what the skills gap was, how important it was, what we needed to do about it. It was a very prominent, important idea. And it remains so to this day. It also raised the question of what is the solution to the skills gap? And one of the big pieces of that solution was the second idea we're going to talk about, which are talent pipelines. Talent pipelines in the most simple form are just a way of saying that we can industrialize the way we think about talent the same way we do about any other item you might want to sell. So it comes out of the business concept of supply chain management, where if you have a really important ingredient or component in a product that you're selling, then you want to have a system in place to make sure you always have it in stock. That's what talent pipelines are, just for skills.
So if what companies were needing, that ingredient they needed, where supply was a skilled labor, then the talent pipeline was that system to supply it.
Yeah, exactly. And that gets us to the last of these big three ideas, and the one we think about most at the National Fund, which are industry partnerships. Basically, industry partnerships are just a way of optimizing the talent pipeline at scale. It's a way of thinking about and industrializing a response to the skills gap. So if the skills gap calls for rethinking our economic systems that we can retrain workers, then talent pipelines are a way of doing that for one company at a time, and industry partnerships are a way of regionalizing that approach.
Because most companies that are in the same industry or sector are trying to hire people that do the same kind of things and need the similar kind of skills. So there's this shared interest in these industry-aligned training and skills. So that's a big incentive for companies that might normally be competing with each other to pool their resources to meet this shared training need. And you just add a community college or a quality training program to the mix and someone to coordinate it all, and you've got an industry partnership.
And the thing about industry partnerships is that they're really core to our work in the National Fund. And they're really core to a lot of our partners' work and our members' work because they are impactful. They're hard to organize, they require a lot of collaboration, a lot of partnership, but if you can do it right, it really can be impactful for workers, for companies, and for entire regions at the same time.
So now that we're all on the same page about these three core ideas and how they're all related to each other, I think it's time that we bring up the problem.
Yeah, so there's a problem. And the problem goes back to the skills gap, which is really it's the idea that underlines all this, right? It's been 15 years since the skills gap became so prominent as an idea, and the problem is that it doesn't explain everything that it purports to explain. It is an insufficient explanation of what was happening after the Great Recession and what has happened since. And there are three reasons for that. First, if the skills gap were really the main reason that unemployment was so high and wage stagnated so much, then you would have expected at that time people who had kept up with kind of the latest and greatest technology skills to see a big raise in their income because they would be in high demand, right? That didn't happen. Scholars had looked at this again and again, and it just did not happen then or later. When wages finally did improve and when unemployment went down, it was a result of really a commitment to full employment policies at the national level and especially by the Federal Reserve. As unemployment returned to normal levels and eventually we got to something closer to full employment, wages got a lot better. And that was especially visible right before and right after COVID. The third reason is something we see a lot on the ground at the National Fund and with our member sites, which is that the challenges workers run into often aren't about their technical skills at all. They're actually more about the barriers they encounter outside of work.
So this is really critical for the National Fund because if the skills gap is insufficient, then that raises some questions for us about the role of talent pipelines and industry partnerships in advancing our vision, an equitable future in which all jobs are good jobs, workers have the resources they need to thrive, and race does not dictate employment outcomes. So we will circle back to that question in just a few minutes. But first, it's really important to pause and acknowledge that the skills gap is a really widespread idea. It was 14 years ago, it is today. There's still articles, you go look it up right now, talking about talent shortage, skills gap, all of these things. So we wanna pause and we're curious how this idea is resonating with you all. And I'm gonna take the clicker. You'll see us fighting over the clicker. And so when you see this statement, you hear this statement, the skills gap is insufficient. We want you to rate your level of agreement with this statement on an Oprah scale. So let me give you your options and then I'll ask you to raise your hands. Do you 100% agree? Number one, Oprah number one. Are you, I'm not sure, kind of just taking it all in? Or are you respectfully disagree, Tom and Carrie? Okay, and all of these are fine if that's how you're feeling. We just want to gauge the room. So raise your hand if you're one. All right. Raise your hand if you're 2, open number 2. Raise your hand if you're open number 3. Okay, don't be shy, it's okay.
Please go for it. Well, I'm seeing a lot of 1s and a lot of 2s and a few 3s.
Yeah.
So we know this is a really big idea that has been ingrained in the workforce field itself for a long time. We're just trying to squeeze this consideration of it into a few minutes, and we're happy to continue to engage. But Carrie, I'm really wondering where you land given your workforce background.
Well, I'm open number 1, and I'll talk a little bit more about why. In order to do that, we have to go back in time again. So I started my career in a number of different direct service, social service jobs, and I spent some time working at an anti-poverty initiative at a community-based organization. Part of my role there was to help coach people on their career and economic goals. I met a family whose story is really relevant to this conversation. So the dad in the family, let's call him Jim. Jim really wanted to go into construction, so he enrolled in an HVAC program at the local community college, and after a lot of really, really hard work, he got his certificate. It is not an exaggeration to say that this was one of the most meaningful accomplishments of his life. Raise your hand if you know a Jim, or you were a Jim, or are a Jim. Yes, he was really proud of himself. We all celebrated this accomplishment. Unfortunately, he really struggled to find and keep work after that, and there were a lot of different factors for that. But one really key insight is that when he was enrolled in the program, he was eligible for a lot of support, from Pell Grants to transportation support, and these supports alleviated financial stress on the family, allowed him to make it to class on time, allowed him to focus on learning, and gain those skills that he needed. When he graduated, a lot of those supports fell off.
Carrie, that's such a profound illustration of how things like the benefits gap work, but also just kind of the access to these barriers to work that we think about, like childcare or housing or transportation.
Yeah, 100%. At the same time that Jim was enrolled in the HVAC program, his wife, I don't know, let's just call her Pam.
Are you sure these folks weren't working at a paper company?
They did not work at a paper company, I promise. Pam had decided to go back to work. She had spent some time at home with the kids, and she wanted to get back into the workforce. And one day I ran into Pam, who was usually very warm and friendly, but this day I could tell she was agitated. And I said, Pam, what's going on? What's the matter? And she explained that she had just come back from an event at the local workforce center that she thought was going to be like a job fair. It ended up being a workshop to teach people things like interview skills, professionalism in the workplace, and even included an activity where the participants walked around the room and they practiced their handshakes. She was so frustrated, and she was kind of insulted, and she explained it to me like this. She said, why are they wasting my time trying to teach me things that I already know instead of helping me with what I really need? And it's not that things like interviewing skills aren't important. It's just that for Pam and lots of other workers like her, that was not her biggest need. So at the time, I didn't really have a good answer for why this workforce program was focusing so much on these things. I now understand that part of the answer is that the workforce development system became really enamored with this idea of soft skills and soft skills training. Soft skills.
That reminds me of a story I'd like to share too, and it's my turn for the awkward clicker transition. So some time ago, I worked as a consultant for a small manufacturing company in the Midwest. They were growing at a good, healthy pace, but they were also located in a town that had a declining population. And so they needed workers, and they couldn't get them all locally, so of course what they did is they found themselves hiring more and more temps. And this company, I want to say they were, for their permanent employees, they were a great place to work in a lot of ways. Their turnover for those employees was quite low, their commitment was quite high, but they were having a lot of trouble with the temps. The turnover for their temp employees that they were more and more reliant on was over 50% per 6 months. People were walking off in the middle of the shift sometimes. They would not complete their orientation. Understandably, this was the cause of a lot of frustration in the company, both among managers and frontline employees who were permanent. And part of my job was to talk to folks in the company and understand what was going on. I was also hearing that the company, because they were growing again, they had a lot of vacancies, including mid-skill vacancies that we would think of as good jobs, but no one was applying for them. So when I talked to employees at the company and supervisors, just like we hear in workforce, they went right to the idea of soft skills and a skills gap. They actually used the word skills gap with me, which shows how this permeated into the for-profit world. And they said, these new people, they don't know how to work.
So how accurate was that? Did these temps, did they not have the skills to do the job?
Well, it's interesting because as you were talking about with Pam, I was thinking about things like professionalism or absenteeism, like how these are factors that companies have to think about, of course. And there can be skill dimensions to them occasionally, but they often, they refer to things that also are not skill related at all. So to give you an example, if you think about something like chronic lateness, yeah, that could be because of a misunderstanding between the worker and the employer about just expectations. But it can also be about transportation.
Right.
It can also be about housing. It can also be about something else going on in that worker's life or their family. And it can also be about management practices.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we know that things like high turnover, they're not about personal characteristics at all.
Yeah, but when you think about these things just in terms of skills, what happens is that it can have a distorting effect and it can lead you to kind of create a door for opening up to bias, either implicit or explicit. So to give you a really stark example of this, there was a fascinating study that researchers at the University of Chicago did not that long ago, where they sent 80,000 fake resumes out to medium and large companies across the US. And these resumes all had basically the same skill set, the same experience that was indicated, but they had different names. And what turned out to happen is that those resumes that had stereotypically white names got called back 10% more often in the aggregate than those with stereotypically black names. And that's bad enough, but if you actually dig below the headline, it's worse. Because some companies, the gap was not 10%, it was 40%.
Wow.
And moreover, the thing that shocked me most is that those companies with a big gap, they were usually advertising for positions we think of as having to do a lot with soft skills. There was customer service, or reception, or sales, things that are relational. What was happening clearly is that either hiring managers or the software they were using was imputing soft skills based on a name.
That's messed up.
Yeah, it is.
I wanted to cuss there, but I figured I probably shouldn't. So here's how I am thinking about how I might try to answer Pam's question before about why the Workforce Center and why companies like ABC Manufacturing were so focused on this idea of soft skills. You know that saying, when the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every problem as a nail? Well, for workforce, it's kind of like when the only tool you have is skills development, you tend to see every workforce problem as a skills problem. It's like we put on skills-colored glasses, and so it makes it really hard. It makes it really hard to see things like lack of transportation or an organizational practice that you might change if everything is about this worker just doesn't have the right skills. Where can I find the worker with the right skills?
I love that metaphor, Carrie, and it actually reminds me about something else with ABC Manufacturing, because the story has a happy ending. To their credit, the management of the company was not satisfied with the skills gap explanation. They wanted to dig deeper. They wanted to take off those skill-colored glasses. And so what they did is they had me and other folks interview not just the established workers, but the temp workers about what was going on in their lives and their perceptions of their employer. And they found a lot of interesting things. One very basic thing that y'all might expect is that a lot of these people are having trouble just meeting their basic needs based on the job. Also, these workers were often unaware, completely unaware of the opportunities for advancement within the company, even though those were advertised internally. And if they were aware, they usually thought they were unqualified based on just kind of little subtle issues with wording. When it happens that some of them were actually quite qualified, they had transferable skills from other industries. So the company made several big changes based on this. First, they raised wages across the board, including for all their temps, by a minimum of 5%. Second, they created a new step-level position, the staff trainer, staff mentor, which was for those entry-level but permanent workers who were looking for a step up. They became trainers and mentors for the new temp employees. They would both show them kind of how the company worked and kind of get them more socially acclimated, help them build their social network, and help them understand their opportunities for advancement in the company. And what happened, you might guess, in a year, turnover went down, vacancies also went down, and the company continued to grow at a healthy pace.
Because they changed their organizational practices.
Exactly. So that really brings us back to this question about industry partnerships. And we want to underline that these remain a really core part of our network. They remain a core part of our work at the National Fund for good reason. They really are a very effective way of scaling up good practices. The question is how we can continue to do that along lines of not just building more pipelines, but creating more supportive systems for people.
Exactly. Tom and I are saying that there's this really exciting opportunity to take industry partnerships to the next level, to kind of level up our industry partnerships. And we want to level up a lot because we want to center this idea of advancing equity. And we know that we need to do more than the talent pipeline to advance equity. Thank you. So to help spark our imagination around this idea, we want to give you an image. So instead of thinking of our workforce in terms of this pipeline metaphor, we want to offer, what if we thought of our regional workforce as a garden? So let's dig into this metaphor a little bit. So here's a photo. We have some plants, we have some water. So actually, we're gonna kind of hold on to this pipeline concept just a little bit. With this, in this picture, it's a spigot. But instead of thinking about piping workers to companies, let's think about piping into our workforce these industry-aligned training and skills, the skills that workers really need. And just like a garden needs more than water to grow, our regional workforces need more than training to thrive. So what other factors should we be thinking about, should we be considering? Look at this garden, okay? We do have some water, but it's just a trickle, and it's kind of over on one side of the garden. Right away, I noticed these plants in the middle that aren't looking as happy as the other plants. It looks like they're experiencing inequitable access to the sunlight. The sunlight might be, anybody want to shout? What might the sunlight be? Anybody? A growth opportunity.
Growth opportunity. It's great.
Housing,
Affordable housing, transportation, childcare, social capital, healthcare. A lot of things, right, that we know there's inequities built into our garden ecosystem here. There's also some weeds. There's some unwanted pests buzzing around. So what might these things represent in your community? Just think about this to yourself. Policies, structures,
Yeah. the
way the garden is built, all of these things.
Carrie, one thing I'm thinking about as someone who is an avid gardener is the soil.
Yeah.
So my wife and I, we love to garden, and last year I remember we planted some cone flowers in a small plot in our yard, and they were really struggling. They were not, we were worried they would die. We live in Georgia, it's known for its hard red clay, right? And we realized that the soil that we had planted them in was just too dense for these flowers. So we dug them up again, and we filled a hole with some compost, and we replanted them, and now they're doing great. So what would soil be in this circumstance? I mean, I think about it maybe in terms of like where you're working in the first place, or the quality of your job.
Yeah, job quality. Yeah, I mean, the metaphor is really great because when you're a gardener, you do have to think about all these different elements, right? And so we want to think about our workforce in the same way. So soil quality is one. My gardening tip is about unwanted pests. Tom, have you ever heard of a pea rock?
I have not, Carrie.
So in Chicago where I live, there are a lot of neighborhood dogs that frequently visit our yard. And these frequent visits ended up killing the 3 bushes that were in our front yard, just like 1, 2, 3, all dead. So when we redid our landscaping this summer, we put a big rock in the corner of the yard for the doggies to come visit. And I think about protecting our yard from potential harms the same way I think about ensuring a healthy and safe work environment.
P-rock, I love that.
And you can take that idea home with you.
So even though for those of you who are not into gardening here, like I hope you can see, Michelle Rafferty, I'm looking at you. I hope you can see that part of what we're trying to talk about here is that it's actually about the creative solutions. Like what unites gardening and workforce development is that you got to think about the entire ecosystem and how you build around those elements that we're all responsible for.
Exactly. And so when we think about, in terms of gardening, when we think about soil quality and we think about the amount of water and we think about removing a fence so that people can, or our plants can access the sun, then our garden thrives. Here, we did take that fence, oh sorry, I'm like pointing like the slides are behind me. Here we did take the fence away. Maybe we can address that public transportation problem.
Yeah, and I'm noticing that the pipeline is spreading water more evenly and that there seems to be a sprinkler system attached.
Yeah.
It's more even distribution of those skills and knowledge. So we want you to think about now what kind of solutions does this garden metaphor spark for you? And we actually would like you to take 3 minutes at your tables just to talk through this a little bit. And we just think about what these different elements in this metaphor might mean in terms of your regional workforce system.
Hello, everybody. Brianna thought we were done. We're not done yet.
We're bringing you back.
Great conversations happening. Tom and I were just walking around listening, mostly to make sure you guys felt pressured to actually answer our question at your table. So because we weren't actually sitting with you all, we would like you to share with us some of your ideas, okay? So in the middle of your table, yes, we're gonna give you some work to do right now. It'll be really easy, I promise. So Andre Green, I'm engaging you. I'm asking you to do something right now. Andrea and I were talking about how it's hard to just sit and listen sometimes to a plenary. It's good to have something to do. So there's some colored note cards in the middle of your table. We would like you each to grab a note card and a pen. There's some pens on your tables. If there's not enough, if you have a pen of your own, that would be great. And we just want to take a few seconds for you to write down one thing that industry partnerships in your region can do to level up. So it might be a small change that they could make. Maybe your industry partnerships are already knocking it out of the park. Is there a way to just take it from on the way to good to that next level? Maybe it's a big change that you want to see. Don't be constrained by any limitation. Just write down your idea. We'll just give you a few seconds to write, and we will collect these afterwards and we'll put them up in the lounge so you can be inspired by each other's ideas. Okay, you can finish your note cards if you didn't have time to finish. But if you've been keeping track, we do have one more Easter egg that we haven't shown you yet, and that is.
So here you see that perhaps the 2 most famous plumbers in the world. In the workforce field, this is how we've come to think of ourselves in the last 15 years. We are really good at building and maintaining these pipelines. And it's important. It is core work for us. It will remain core work. But we can think bigger than that. We can think outside the pipeline as well. That's really a matter of also expanding our toolkit and our set of partnerships. But by thinking like that, by thinking more like gardeners, we can get good at growing flower beds too.
Tom and I wanted to dress as Mario and Luigi for this plenary, and we were told no. So just know that. Something you were missing out on. But speaking of collaboration, who are the gardeners in your region? Okay? So you have the people, the typical people you think of in your industry partnership. We want to emphasize that one way that our garden metaphor does fall short a little bit, as amazing as it was, is that in reality, job seekers and workers are not only part of the garden, part of your ecosystem, but they're also gardeners. They can and should be shaping the ecosystem, shaping the workforce and our workforce development strategies and solutions. In fact, that is one really important way, and there's one thing you can take away, you can take this away. One way to level up your industry partnerships is precisely to think of your job seekers and workers in this way. At the National Fund, our network members and the industry partnerships they convene are thinking about creative ways to do that, to center job seekers and workers in shaping workforce strategy. I'm going to share just a few examples. Our collaboratives in the Bay Area, in Chicago, where you're at, woo, woo, are thinking about how do we help workers have more control and power in shaping their own career journeys, from efforts like making sure that worker rights education is embedded in our workforce development programming, or equipping frontline workers to shape workplace practice change, right? They're right here. I'm just like looking right at them. In Birmingham, I just saw them over here. The Birmingham Tech Council has a subcommittee of young adult workers on the Tech Council, and their voices, their perspectives, they actually help shape and make decisions about what the Tech Council is going to do to build a tech economy in Birmingham. Our collaborative in Hawaii, the Hawaii Workforce Funders Collaborative. Hawaii, where you at? They understood, you know what, place, context, culture in Hawaii is really important. So before we do any workforce development strategy, we're going to ask, what does a good job mean in Hawaii for Hawaiians, particularly Native Hawaiians? I could have listed lots of other great examples from our network. You can hear from these collaboratives and many more in upcoming Shift sessions. In fact, if you go to the Shift app, the first page, all of the sessions that include our network members are highlighted right there. So please check them out.
So in closing, we got a couple takeaways for y'all. One, take off your skill-colored glasses if you've still got them on. They're useful sometimes, but they can cloud our sense of what is and is not a skill-based problem. And by taking them off, we may see the picture more clearly. Two, expand the realm of who you're collaborating with. There are a lot of other kinds of organizations out there that are not workforce organizations, but themselves own a big piece of this problem, whether it's transportation or housing or banking. There are other folks that we can work with, and they will expand our capacity and help us be better at this work in turn. Three, expand, as Carrie was just saying, your partnerships to also include workers themselves. They are gardeners with us in this process, and they can help us make all of this work stronger. So with that, thank you for your time today. Go forth and garden.